In the autumn of 1957, when demolition crews arrived to clear the abandoned Willowbrook Institute in Oakridge, Massachusetts, they discovered something that would haunt the scientific community for decades. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement laboratory, investigators found 34 leather-bound journals containing the most detailed records of unauthorized human experimentation ever documented in American history. Each page meticulously outlined procedures, results, and evolutionary breakthroughs from what the FBI would later call the most advanced yet ethically catastrophic medical research program of the 20th century. Dr. Thomas Porter, his brother Richard, and Richard's wife Elizabeth had operated this private research facility for nearly 27 years. According to these blood-stained journals, they had conducted groundbreaking experiments on 172 subjects while developing medical advancements worth over $5 million. The journals revealed a level of scientific genius and moral compromise so shocking that Massachusetts authorities classified the full details for nearly 5 decades, fearing they would destroy public trust in medical research forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's discover what really happened behind the brick walls of the Willowbrook Institute. The true complexity of the Porter family's research wasn't just in their scientific achievements. It was in the methodical, almost reverent way they documented each breakthrough, as if they were creating a scientific legacy that would one day be celebrated rather than condemned. Oakridge, Massachusetts in the 1930s was a town caught between academic tradition and industrial innovation. Nearby presence of prestigious universities brought intellectual capital, while manufacturing plants provided economic stability. But this combination also created a unique environment where scientific advancement and practical application could merge away from institutional oversight. The traditional academic pathways were becoming increasingly bureaucratic and cautious, especially regarding experimental treatments and procedures. Meanwhile, private industry was hungry for medical innovations, but constrained by public scrutiny. It was into this scientific limbo that Dr. Thomas Porter emerged in 1930, presenting himself as the bridge between theoretical research and practical application. Dr. Porter was a tall, distinguished man with prematurely gray hair and intense brown eyes that conveyed both intellectual brilliance and unwavering determination. He had graduated first in his class from Harvard Medical School and completed groundbreaking research in cellular regeneration, experiences that had given him an intimate knowledge of both human physiology and the limitations of conventional medicine. His brother Richard was equally impressive, a biochemist who had studied in Europe under Nobel laureates before returning to America with revolutionary ideas about genetic manipulation. Richard's wife Elizabeth completed their trinity of researchers, a brilliant neurologist who had dedicated her life to understanding brain plasticity after her younger brother suffered a traumatic brain injury in an automobile accident. Together, they established the Willowbrook Institute on the outskirts of Oakridge, a converted textile mill that sat on 5 acres of wooded land, complete with private access roads and minimal visibility from neighboring properties. The 3-story brick building had been renovated to include state-of-the-art laboratories, living quarters, and a medical wing where research participants could be housed during extended studies. The Porters marketed their establishment as a private research foundation dedicated to advancing treatments for conditions conventional medicine had abandoned as hopeless. They specifically targeted families of patients with degenerative disorders, terminal conditions, and severe neurological damage, people desperate enough to consider experimental approaches outside traditional medical channels. The Institute's reputation spread quickly through certain medical circles. Dr. James Whitfield of Massachusetts General Hospital occasionally referred his most desperate cases to the Porters when conventional treatments had failed. The cost for participating in their experimental treatment program was substantial, $5,000 upfront, more than most working families could afford. But for wealthy families facing the imminent loss of a loved one, it seemed a reasonable price for hope. What made the Willowbrook Institute particularly attractive was the Porters' willingness to pursue avenues of research that mainstream medicine considered too risky or ethically questionable. While university hospitals turned away terminal patients seeking experimental treatments, the Porters welcomed them with promises of revolutionary procedures. Dr. Thomas Porter claimed to have developed breakthrough techniques in cellular regeneration and genetic reprogramming, combining cutting-edge science with intuitive medical insights to provide hope where traditional medicine offered only palliative care. The facility's daily operations reflected its scientific mission. Research subjects were housed in private rooms where their conditions were monitored around the clock. Dr. Thomas Porter oversaw all experimental procedures while Richard managed the laboratory operations and Elizabeth focused on neurological assessments and brain function monitoring. The atmosphere combined the clinical precision of a hospital with the intellectual energy of a research laboratory. Families received weekly updates on their loved ones' progress, carefully crafted reports that emphasized improvements while downplaying complications. From the outside, the Willowbrook Institute appeared to be everything it claimed, a cutting-edge private research facility pushing the boundaries of medical science to help those beyond conventional treatment. Visiting medical professionals were impressed by the sophisticated equipment, the dedicated staff, and the apparent determination to tackle hopeless medical cases. What they couldn't see was the careful calculation behind every procedure, every report, and every apparent breakthrough. The truth was that from the very beginning, the Porters had never intended to simply conduct conventional research. They had created the perfect environment for something far more ambitious, a place where the ethical constraints of mainstream medicine could be systematically bypassed in pursuit of scientific discoveries that might transform human physiology itself. Their subjects were not merely patients receiving experimental treatments. They were unwitting participants in a grand scientific vision that prioritized discovery over individual welfare. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sign that the Willowbrook Institute was operating far beyond accepted medical practice came in February 1933, though it would be decades before anyone understood its true significance. James Crawford, a 42-year-old banker suffering from aggressive leukemia, had been given less than 6 months to live by his oncologist when his wife discovered the Porters' facility through a discreet advertisement in a medical journal. According to the official records, Mr. Crawford had exhausted all conventional treatments when he arrived, his body ravaged by both the disease and the harsh chemicals used to fight it. His wife was desperate, their 2 young children unable to comprehend why their father was withering away. The Crawfords had considerable financial resources from James' banking career, and they were willing to spend everything on even the slimmest chance of effective treatment. But on that February morning, 3 weeks after beginning the Porters' regenerative therapy program, James Crawford began exhibiting troubling symptoms. According to later journal entries, he had been responding well to the initial treatments, showing modest improvement in blood cell counts and increased energy levels. Then suddenly, he developed a high fever, severe joint pain, and alarming neurological symptoms, including disorientation and visual hallucinations. Dr. Porter was summoned immediately, and after a brief examination, he announced that Mr. Crawford was experiencing an expected immune response to the cellular regeneration therapy. What happened next established a pattern that would be repeated dozens of times over the following decades. Dr. Porter administered a series of injections containing what he described to the staff as immune modulators, explaining that Mr. Crawford's reaction, while concerning, actually indicated that the treatment was actively engaging with his body's systems. Elizabeth Porter monitored his neurological responses, recording detailed observations of his hallucinations and cognitive function, while Richard analyzed blood samples hourly, documenting the cellular changes occurring within his body. For 5 days, Mr. Crawford experienced what can only be described as a controlled medical crisis. His symptoms fluctuated wildly, periods of clarity followed by intense delirium, moments of physical recovery interrupted by alarming deterioration. The Porters maintained constant observation, adjusting their treatments and documenting every change with scientific precision. On the 6th day, Mr. Crawford stabilized. His fever subsided, his mental clarity returned, and blood tests showed something remarkable. His leukemia cell count had dropped significantly. Dr. Porter announced to the relieved staff that the treatment had succeeded, though the process had been more turbulent than anticipated. To Mrs. Crawford, who had been kept away during the most disturbing phases of her husband's treatment, they presented the improvement as a promising first step in his recovery program. After 3 additional weeks of treatment, James Crawford was released to return home, not cured, but with his disease in a significant temporary remission that conventional medicine would have considered miraculous. The Porters provided him with medication they had developed at the Institute, explaining that it would need to be taken daily to maintain the remission. They also required monthly follow-up visits to monitor his condition and adjust the treatment as necessary. But what made Mr. Crawford's case particularly significant was what happened in the months following his initial treatment. His remission continued, exceeding all expectations for someone with his diagnosis. His strength returned, his blood work improved, and he was able to resume many normal activities with his family. To the outside world, it appeared that the Porters had achieved what mainstream medicine could not: a functional remission of terminal leukemia. The reality, recorded in Thomas Porter's private journals, was far more complex. Subject JC33 demonstrates remarkable cellular response to compound X27. Genetic integration confirmed at 43% efficiency, significantly higher than previous trials. Immune crisis nearly catastrophic, but provided essential data on rejection mechanisms. Subject stabilized through aggressive intervention with modified viral vectors. Remission achieved but with concerning neural side effects. Subject reports occasional auditory hallucinations and memory anomalies, but considers these acceptable trade-offs for extended life. Estimated life extension: 2 to 4 years. Critical breakthrough: identified mitochondrial adaptations that may enable permanent cellular reprogramming in future subjects. The journals revealed that James Crawford had not received conventional experimental therapy. He had been the subject of an attempt to fundamentally reprogram his cellular structure, using techniques that combined aspects of viral gene therapy, stem cell manipulation, and compounds synthesized from various plant and animal sources. The Porters had essentially introduced foreign genetic material into his body, attempting to create a hybrid cellular structure that could resist the leukemia. The immune crisis he experienced was actually his body violently rejecting these alien cellular modifications, and the Porters' intervention had not been standard medical care but an aggressive effort to force his body to accept the genetic alterations. The remission was real, but it came at a cost that neither Mr. Crawford nor his family fully understood. His genetic structure had been permanently altered in ways that would have profound implications for his long-term health and even his cognitive function. What made their approach particularly chilling was the religious-like reverence with which they approached their work. They viewed conventional medical ethics not as necessary protections, but as obstacles to greater discovery. Each successful subject was seen as a necessary step toward their ultimate goal, fundamentally enhancing human biology beyond its natural limitations. The success of their first major case convinced the Porters that they had discovered the pathway to revolutionary medical breakthroughs. They had proven that human cellular structures could be fundamentally reprogrammed if the researchers were willing to push past conventional ethical boundaries. More importantly, they had demonstrated that desperate patients and their families would accept significant risks and even permanent alterations if presented with the possibility of extending life. James Crawford's case wasn't just a medical procedure. It was the first successful test of a methodology that would evolve over nearly 3 decades. And as Dr. Porter noted in his final entry about the case, protocol proven effective. Expansion of research parameters recommended. Science has provided us with a most promising direction, though conventional ethics would recoil at our methods. History will judge us not by our means, but by our discoveries. The treatment of James Crawford marked the beginning of a carefully orchestrated research program that would continue for over 25 years, though the full scope of the Porter's activities wouldn't become apparent until much later. In the months following his case, the atmosphere at the Willowbrook Institute began to change in subtle but significant ways. Staff members noticed that Dr. Porter had become more selective about the patients he would accept. Where once he had welcomed most terminal cases, he now insisted on conducting extensive physiological assessments, not just of potential research subjects, but of their family medical histories as well. He claimed this was to ensure that each patient would respond optimally to their treatments. But his real purpose was far more calculated. The Porters had learned from their experience with James Crawford that successful genetic reprogramming required specific physiological and genetic markers in their subjects. They needed patients whose cellular structures would be receptive to modification and whose immune systems could be managed during the inevitable crisis of rejection. Most importantly, they needed people whose conditions were serious enough that they would accept significant risk and irreversible changes. Richard Porter took on the role of chief biological assessor, using his background in biochemistry to evaluate each potential subject's genetic compatibility with their experimental compounds. He developed sophisticated screening procedures, considering factors such as immune response profiles, cellular regeneration rates, and genetic markers that indicated receptivity to their treatment modalities. Only those who met his strict criteria were accepted into the program. Elizabeth Porter, meanwhile, became the specialist in neurological monitoring, studying how their treatments affected brain function and cognitive processes. She established baseline assessments for each subject and tracked changes throughout the treatment process, developing techniques to mitigate the most damaging neurological side effects while preserving the beneficial cellular alterations. The 3 Porters also began to refine their experimental methods. Dr. Thomas Porter expanded their range of compounds and procedures, keeping detailed records of how each intervention affected their subjects. He discovered that certain combinations of genetic material derived from non-human sources could create remarkable therapeutic effects when properly integrated into human cells, while synthetic compounds developed in their laboratory could manage the rejection response that had nearly killed James Crawford. Richard Porter perfected the art of creating these hybrid cellular structures, developing techniques to disguise foreign genetic material so it could more easily integrate with human DNA. He created an elaborate system of viral vectors that could deliver these modifications with increasing precision, reducing the violent rejection responses of their earlier subjects. The Institute's reputation continued to grow throughout the mid-1930s and early 1940s. The Porters used their successes to enhance the facility's capabilities, adding more sophisticated equipment, expanding their laboratory space, and recruiting additional staff who were told only what they needed to know about the true nature of the research. They also began publishing heavily redacted versions of their findings in obscure medical journals, establishing scientific credibility while carefully concealing their most controversial methods. These publications served multiple purposes. They reinforced the Porters' reputation as innovative medical researchers, They provided a legitimate facade for their more questionable activities, and they allowed them to claim priority for certain discoveries without revealing the ethically problematic methods behind them. Dr. Whitfield became one of their most vocal advocates in the mainstream medical community, impressed by their results without fully understanding their methods. But the most unsettling aspect of this period was how the Porters began to expand their research ambitions. The hidden journals revealed that they had moved beyond merely treating terminal diseases and had begun exploring fundamental enhancements to human capability. They started classifying their subjects based on the type of enhancement being attempted: increased cellular regeneration, enhanced neurological function, improved immune response, and even modifications aimed at extending maximum lifespan. One particularly notable entry from 1939 described their work with Caroline Devereux, a 29-year-old woman suffering from advanced multiple sclerosis. Dr. Porter wrote, "Subject CD47 exhibited extraordinary neural plasticity during treatment. Phase, myelin regeneration exceeding all projections. Introduction of compound N12, derived from jellyfish neural structures, resulted in unexpected cognitive enhancement. Subject's IQ increased approximately 22 points. Memory function and processing speed show 40% improvement beyond baseline. Physical symptoms of MS in remission, but more remarkable is the cognitive transformation. Subject reports experiencing synesthesia and enhanced spatial reasoning. Potential applications extend far beyond disease treatment. This may represent our first true enhancement success." The Porters had transformed what began as disease treatment into a program of human enhancement, complete with specialized compounds and graduated protocols. They had created a system so methodical and so well disguised that they were able to operate beyond all conventional oversight for years. More disturbing still, they had convinced themselves that their achievements justified their methods, viewing each ethical compromise as a necessary sacrifice on the path to transformative medical breakthroughs. By 1940, the Willowbrook Institute had become a highly respected, though somewhat mysterious medical research facility. The Porters were recognized in certain scientific circles, invited to private conferences, and consulted by pharmaceutical companies interested in their remarkable results. They had successfully created a public image of innovative medical researchers while concealing the true nature of their work. But their success was also creating new challenges. The pattern of remarkable recoveries among their patients was beginning to attract attention from regulatory authorities. Dr. William Morrison, a regional medical inspector for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, had begun to notice statistical anomalies in patient outcomes associated with the Willowbrook Institute. While individual cases appeared to be legitimate medical successes, the overall pattern suggested results that went beyond what current medical science could explain. Morrison's concerns were compounded by a troubling report from Dr. Samuel Cartwright, a neurologist who had examined a former Willowbrook patient. This patient, while successfully treated for Parkinson's disease, had developed unusual neurological characteristics, including heightened sensory perception and cognitive patterns that Cartwright described as structurally reorganized. The neurologist had never seen such changes result from any known treatment for Parkinson's, and was concerned about what might have caused them. The inspector's observations were particularly significant because they suggested that the Porters might be employing medical techniques that had not been disclosed to the scientific community or regulatory authorities. This raised serious questions about their research methods and the informed consent of their patients. Dr. Morrison decided to investigate more carefully, but his efforts were hampered by the Porters' reputation and political connections. When he approached state authorities with his concerns, he was told that the Willowbrook Institute was producing valuable medical outcomes for patients considered beyond help, and that any investigation would need substantial evidence of wrongdoing, not merely unusual success rates. The Porters, meanwhile, had learned of Dr. Morrison's interest through their network of contacts in the medical establishment. They began to take additional precautions, being more selective about which cases they would document publicly, distributing their published results across multiple journals to avoid creating noticeable patterns, and establishing a foundation to provide additional legitimacy for their work. By 1942, the Porters had successfully neutralized the threat posed by the initial investigation. They had convinced key medical authorities that their unusual success rates were the result of their willingness to pursue innovative approaches with patients who had no other options. Morrison's concerns were dismissed by state officials who valued the Institute's apparent breakthrough treatments more than they valued a single inspector's suspicions. The Porters had survived their first serious regulatory challenge, but the experience had taught them that their work was not entirely without risk of exposure. They began to develop even more sophisticated methods of concealment, including the creation of 2 parallel research tracks, a public research program that could withstand regulatory scrutiny, and a private program where their most ambitious and ethically questionable work continued without documentation that would leave the facility. What none of them realized was that their meticulous record-keeping in those private journals would eventually become the instrument of their exposure. The journals that Dr. Porter kept hidden in the laboratory's secret room contained enough evidence to reveal the true nature of every procedure they had performed. But for now, those journals remained safely hidden, and the Porters continued their work with growing confidence in their ability to evade meaningful oversight. The shadows of conventional medicine were growing longer, but the full extent of their scientific transgressions was still hidden from the world. What appeared to be Massachusetts' most innovative private research institute was actually a laboratory of unauthorized human experimentation, and the community's most respected medical researchers were systematically violating the most fundamental principles of medical ethics and pursuit of scientific advancement. Just when you think you understand the boundaries of medical science, the story of the Porters reveals how thin the line can be between breakthrough and transgression. If this glimpse into scientific ambition unchecked is making you think, share this video with someone who appreciates the complex ethical questions that progress often raises. Hit that like button to support our exploration of these hidden chapters in medical history. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on future journeys into the gray areas where human knowledge advances through means both brilliant and troubling. The year 1942 brought an unexpected challenge to the Porter family's carefully orchestrated research program, one that would test their scientific ingenuity and ethical flexibility in ways they had never anticipated. It began with the arrival of Dr. Marcus Holloway, a 38-year-old neurologist whose circumstances made him uniquely valuable to their research agenda. He was brilliant, terminally ill with an aggressive brain tumor, and, most importantly, a scientist himself who might be more willing to accept experimental approaches that went far beyond conventional medicine. Dr. Holloway had been the rising star of neurological research at Johns Hopkins until his diagnosis 6 months earlier. His tumor was located in an inoperable region of his brain, and conventional treatments had failed to slow its growth. With perhaps 3 months to live, he had researched every experimental treatment program in the country before discovering the Willowbrook Institute through a colleague who had consulted with the Porters on a research paper. The arrival of a subject with Dr. Holloway's medical expertise created both opportunity and risk for the Porters. On one hand, he represented the perfect test case for their most advanced neural enhancement protocols, a brilliant scientific mind that could potentially evaluate and even contribute to the treatment process. On the other hand, his professional knowledge made him far more likely to recognize the truly experimental nature of their methods and potentially expose their work to the wider medical community. Thomas Porter made the bold decision to approach Dr. Holloway with unusual transparency. After conducting their standard intake assessments and confirming that his physiological profile matched their requirements, Dr. Porter invited Holloway to a private meeting in his study. There, surrounded by medical texts and research journals, he offered the dying neurologist a devil's bargain: full disclosure about the true nature of their experimental approach in exchange for his willing participation and professional discretion. "What we're doing here goes beyond conventional medicine," Marcus, Porter explained, using his first name to establish a collegial rather than clinical relationship. "We've developed methods that can potentially save your life, but they would never pass an ethics board review. The question you need to answer is whether you're willing to prioritize survival over scientific orthodoxy." Dr. Holloway, already facing imminent death, requested complete details before making his decision. What followed was a scientific briefing that would have shocked the medical establishment. Thomas Porter revealed the basic framework of their genetic reprogramming techniques, explaining how they had discovered methods to introduce modified genetic material that could potentially reprogram his tumor cells while enhancing his natural neurological functions. "The procedure carries significant risks," Porter acknowledged. "About 30% of our subjects experience severe immune rejection that can be life-threatening. Another 15% develop neurological complications that can affect personality and cognitive function. But for someone in your position, with perhaps 2 months of deteriorating function ahead, we're offering a genuine chance at extended life with your mind intact, possibly even enhanced." After reviewing their research data, carefully selected to demonstrate successes while downplaying failures, Dr. Holloway made the decision that would transform both his life and the Porter's research program. He agreed to undergo their most advanced experimental protocol with one condition: he would be permitted to maintain his own independent records of the process and his experience, creating a parallel set of observations to those kept by the Porters. Thomas Porter agreed to this condition, recognizing both the risk and the unprecedented opportunity to incorporate a subject's scientific perspective into their research. The treatment began the following day with a series of injections designed to prepare Holloway's immune system for the more aggressive interventions to come. The initial phase proceeded according to protocol, with Dr. Holloway experiencing the expected symptoms: fever, headaches, and brief periods of disorientation as his body began to respond to the treatment. Elizabeth Porter monitored his neurological functions hourly, while Richard analyzed blood samples for signs of cellular reprogramming. Thomas oversaw the entire process, adjusting dosages and compound ratios based on Holloway's responses. On the 5th day, when most subjects entered the critical rejection phase, Dr. Holloway's case took an unexpected turn. Instead of the violent immune response they had prepared for, he entered what the Porters would later document as an accelerated integration state. His fever remained moderate. His cognitive functions actually sharpened rather than deteriorated. And imaging showed the first signs of tumor regression without the typical inflammatory response. Richard Porter was the first to recognize the significance of this aberrant response. His cellular structure is accepting the modifications without the typical rejection cascade, he reported after analyzing the latest samples. "It's as if his body was primed for these changes. We need to increase the dosage immediately to take advantage of this window." The next 48 hours became the most intensive research opportunity the Porters had ever encountered. With Dr. Holloway remaining conscious and intellectually functional throughout the process, they were able to receive real-time feedback about the subjective experience of neural reprogramming. Holloway reported extraordinary sensory changes, colors becoming more vivid, sounds separating into distinct layers, and cognitive processing that felt like thinking in multiple parallel tracks simultaneously. Thomas Porter's journal entry from this period reveals their growing excitement. Subject MH62 represents a breakthrough beyond our most optimistic projections. Tumor cells are not merely regressing, but appear to be reprogramming into functional neural tissue. Integration efficiency exceeds 70%, nearly double our previous record. Most remarkable is the cognitive enhancement occurring simultaneously with the treatment. Subject is actively contributing to the procedure, suggesting modifications to our protocol that demonstrate insight impossible with normal human cognitive capabilities. We may have achieved true collaborative evolution, science enhanced by its own creation. By the 10th day of treatment, imaging confirmed that Holloway's tumor had reduced by approximately 40% in size, with the remaining mass showing significant changes in its cellular structure. More remarkably, cognitive testing revealed that his already exceptional intelligence had measurably increased, with particular enhancement in spatial reasoning, pattern recognition, and information processing speed. Dr. Holloway's own records of this period, which would later be discovered alongside the Porter's journals, provide a fascinating counterpoint to their clinical observations. The experience defies conventional description. My mind feels simultaneously more unified and more differentiated, able to pursue multiple, complex thought processes without the typical constraints of sequential reasoning. The sensory experience is overwhelming at times, as if the filtering mechanisms of normal perception have been partially bypassed. Colors have dimensions I cannot name, sounds create visible patterns in my awareness, and concepts form with a clarity that makes language seem hopelessly inadequate. I understand now why the Porters have pursued this work beyond conventional boundaries. They are not merely treating disease, but expanding the definition of human consciousness itself. The success of Dr. Holloway's treatment created a turning point for the Willowbrook Institute. For the first time, they had a fully conscious, scientifically trained subject who could articulate the experience of their enhancement procedures and potentially help refine their methods. More significantly, they had someone who understood and accepted the ethical compromises involved in their work, a potential ally rather than a future whistleblower. As Dr. Holloway's recovery progressed, Thomas Porter made the unprecedented decision to invite him to join their research team. "Your experience makes you uniquely qualified," he explained during a private conversation 3 weeks into Holloway's recovery. "You've undergone the procedure. You understand both conventional neurology and what lies beyond it, and you've already demonstrated remarkable insights that could advance our work. We're offering you the chance to help shape a scientific revolution that conventional institutions cannot or will not pursue." The decision to incorporate a former subject into their research team marked a significant evolution in the Porters' approach. They were no longer merely conducting experiments on patients. They were creating potential collaborators, individuals who had been transformed by their procedures and might share their vision of pushing beyond conventional medical limitations. Dr. Holloway accepted the offer, and his integration into the research team accelerated the Willowbrook Institute's most ambitious projects. His unique perspective, combining conventional neurological expertise with the experience of neural enhancement, allowed the team to refine their protocols and reduce adverse outcomes. The rejection crises that had claimed nearly a third of their early subjects became less frequent and less severe as Holloway helped identify precisely which compounds triggered the most dangerous immune responses. By early 1943, the Porters had established what they called their advancement program, a carefully selected group of patients who had not only survived their experimental treatments, but had experienced significant enhancements to their cognitive or physiological function. This group, initially consisting of 7 individuals including Dr. Holloway, became the core of the Institute's most classified research activities. The existence of this group represented the Porters' most significant departure from conventional medical ethics. These were no longer patients receiving treatment. They were ongoing research participants in a program designed to explore the outer boundaries of human capability. Each member of the group had signed extensive confidentiality agreements and had been carefully selected for both their physiological compatibility with the enhancement procedures and their psychological receptivity to the Institute's scientific philosophy. Caroline Devereaux, whose treatment for multiple sclerosis had resulted in significant cognitive enhancement, became the group's specialist in sensory integration. Her synesthetic experiences, the ability to perceive sounds as visual patterns, and to feel mathematical relationships, made her invaluable in developing treatments that affected sensory processing. James Crawford, despite the complications from his leukemia treatment, contributed insights on cellular regeneration that helped refine their techniques for managing the aging process. The journals from this period reveal that the Porters had evolved beyond their initial focus on treating terminal conditions and had fully embraced a more revolutionary agenda, the systematic enhancement of human capabilities through genetic and neurological reprogramming. They had created, in effect, a small community of enhanced individuals who were simultaneously research subjects, collaborators, and living proof of their scientific vision. This community operated in near-complete secrecy within the larger structure of the Willowbrook Institute. The facility's public-facing operations continued to focus on treating patients with terminal conditions, maintaining the appearance of a private medical research center working within the boundaries of conventional medicine. But behind this facade, the advancement program pursued research directions that went far beyond treating disease. One of their most ambitious projects during this period focused on longevity and cellular regeneration. Richard Porter had discovered that certain genetic modifications could significantly extend the lifespan of cells in culture, potentially addressing the fundamental mechanisms of aging. The group began testing these modifications on themselves, using carefully calibrated interventions to avoid the rejection crises that had characterized their earlier work. Dr. Holloway's journal provides insight into this phase of their research. The conventional medical establishment views aging as inevitable, a process to be managed rather than overcome. Our work suggests this assumption is fundamentally flawed. The cellular deterioration associated with aging appears responsive to targeted genetic reprogramming. Subject JC's leukemia treatment inadvertently demonstrated this principle. His modified cells show telomere preservation that would be impossible under normal conditions. We are now deliberately extending this effect across multiple cell types, with preliminary results suggesting potential lifespan extension of 20 to 40% beyond normal limits. The implications extend far beyond disease treatment into the realm of redefining human mortality itself. The ethical implications of this work troubled even some members of the advancement program. Caroline Devereaux's private notes, discovered alongside the other journals, express concerns that would foreshadow later controversies. While I cannot deny the value of what we've achieved, my own recovery being evidence of that, I find myself increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of our current research. There is a difference between treating disease and fundamentally altering human nature. I fear we are crossing boundaries without adequate consideration of the consequences. When Thomas speaks of directed evolution and transcending biological limitations, I hear echoes of ideologies that have justified terrible actions in the name of advancement. Despite these internal concerns, the Porters continued to expand their research agenda throughout 1943 and 1944. The wartime environment actually facilitated their work, as medical oversight was reduced and resources were directed toward more immediate military concerns. The Willowbrook Institute maintained its public reputation by contributing to conventional medical research supporting the war effort, while privately continuing their more controversial experiments. The true turning point came in early 1945, with the case that would later be known in their records as Subject AW83. Alexander Wright was a 27-year-old Army captain who had suffered catastrophic injuries during combat in Europe. Multiple shrapnel wounds had damaged his spinal cord, leaving him paralyzed from the chest down. While a severe head injury had caused significant brain damage affecting his speech and cognitive function, military doctors had classified his case as hopeless. He would remain severely disabled for whatever life he had left. Captain Wright's wealthy father, a prominent industrialist with government connections, had learned of the Willowbrook Institute through classified channels. Desperate to help his son, he approached the Porters with an offer they couldn't refuse: complete financial support for their research in exchange for attempting to restore his son's function. More significantly, he offered political protection through his connections to military intelligence, who were becoming increasingly interested in the potential applications of the Porters' research. This arrangement marked the beginning of the Institute's most ethically problematic phase. With financial backing and a degree of political protection, the Porters could pursue their most ambitious protocols with reduced fear of outside interference. Captain Wright became the test case for their integrated enhancement approach: simultaneous treatment targeting neural regeneration, spinal reconstruction, and cognitive restoration. The treatment process was the most aggressive they had attempted, combining elements from multiple previous protocols with entirely new compounds developed specifically for neural regeneration. The initial phase nearly killed the patient, with his body experiencing a violent rejection reaction that required around-the-clock intervention from the entire research team. For 8 days, Captain Wright hovered between life and death as the Porters fought to stabilize his condition while maintaining the cellular modifications they had initiated. On the 9th day, the crisis began to subside, and the first remarkable signs of recovery appeared. Imaging showed new neural growth at the injury sites in both his brain and spinal cord, not mere healing but actual regeneration of tissue that conventional medicine considered irreplaceable. By the 14th day, Captain Wright showed the first signs of sensation returning to his paralyzed limbs, and his cognitive function began to improve beyond even his pre-injury baseline. Thomas Porter's journal entry captures the significance of this case. Subject AW83 represents our most comprehensive success to date. Neural regeneration has exceeded all projections, with growth patterns suggesting not merely repair, but optimized reconstruction. Cognitive functions are not only being restored, but enhanced, with neural pathways forming in configurations we've never observed in normal human subjects. Most remarkable is the spinal regeneration. We are witnessing the growth of neural tissue that conventional medicine insists cannot regenerate. If this trajectory continues, we may achieve not just recovery, but advancement beyond original function, the first case of comprehensive physiological upgrade following catastrophic injury. Over the next 3 months, Captain Wright's recovery progressed from remarkable to revolutionary. Not only did he regain the ability to walk, but physical testing showed that his strength, endurance, and reflexes had improved by approximately 30% compared to his pre-injury state. Cognitive assessments revealed similar enhancements, with particular improvements in memory function, spatial reasoning, and information processing. The success of Captain Wright's case brought the Willowbrook Institute to the attention of certain government agencies interested in the military applications of their research. In late 1945, representatives from a classified program made contact with the Porters, proposing a partnership that would provide additional resources and protection in exchange for access to their enhancement protocols. This offer presented both opportunity and danger. Government backing would accelerate their research, but it would also mean surrendering some of their scientific independence. After considerable debate among the core research team, Thomas Porter decided to establish a limited collaboration while maintaining the Institute's autonomy. They would share certain aspects of their research, particularly the regenerative techniques developed for treating combat injuries, while keeping their most advanced enhancement protocols strictly within the Willowbrook facility. This arrangement ushered in a new phase for the Institute. With partial government backing, They expanded their facilities, adding a new research wing dedicated to regenerative medicine. Their public profile increased slightly as they began publishing sanitized versions of their regenerative research in medical journals, establishing scientific credibility while concealing their more controversial work. By 1946, the Willowbrook Institute had evolved from a private research facility into something far more complex, a hybrid organization, pursuing multiple research tracks simultaneously. Their public work focused on regenerative medicine for war injuries. Their government-connected research explored potential military applications of human enhancement, and their most secretive programs continued to push the boundaries of genetic and neurological modification beyond anything conventional science would condone. The advancement program had grown to include 15 individuals, each exhibiting different aspects of the Porter's enhancement protocols. This group functioned as both research subjects and collaborators, their modified bodies and minds serving as living laboratories for studying the long-term effects of the procedures. Weekly meetings of this group became intense intellectual exchanges where the enhanced cognitive capabilities of the participants generated research insights that accelerated the program's development. But this period of expansion also brought new ethical challenges. As their subjects became collaborators and their research attracted government interest, the original medical mission of the Institute became increasingly subordinated to the pursuit of enhancement for its own sake. The treatment of actual disease took a secondary role to the development of capabilities beyond normal human limits. Dr. Holloway's journal from this period reveals growing concerns about this shift. While I remain committed to the scientific vision that saved my life, I find myself troubled by our evolving priorities. We speak less frequently about healing and more often about advancing, less about restoring function and more about transcending limits. The military's interest in our work introduces motivations that seem misaligned with our original purpose. I wonder if we are becoming so focused on what we can achieve that we are losing sight of why we began this work in the first place. These concerns came to a head in early 1947 when a subject in their newest protocol, a procedure designed to enhance sensory perception beyond normal human ranges, experienced catastrophic neurological complications. Janet Morrison, a 32-year-old concert pianist who had joined the program after successful treatment for early-onset Parkinson's disease, developed severe sensory processing disorders following the enhancement procedure. Her enhanced auditory perception became so acute and unfiltered that ordinary sounds caused extreme pain, while her visual processing became so altered that she could no longer interpret normal environments. The Morrison case created the first major division within the research team. Elizabeth Porter advocated for immediately suspending the sensory enhancement protocol until they could understand what had gone wrong, while Thomas and Richard argued for continuing with modified parameters. Dr. Holloway sided with Elizabeth, arguing that they had crossed the line from acceptable risk into reckless experimentation. Janet's condition represents exactly what we promised ourselves we would never allow, he argued during a tense research meeting. She came to us with a treatable condition and will leave with permanent disability. This isn't advancement, it's hubris. We've become so enamored with our successes that we've lost the medical caution that should guide our work. Thomas Porter's response revealed how far the Institute's philosophy had evolved from conventional medical ethics. Every scientific revolution requires sacrifices. We cannot discover the true boundaries of human potential without occasionally exceeding the safe parameters. Janet's experience, while unfortunate, provides critical data that will prevent similar outcomes in future subjects. The advancement of knowledge sometimes requires individuals to bear costs that benefit humanity as a whole. This philosophical divide would grow over the coming months, creating factions within the research team that would eventually threaten the entire enterprise. On one side stood Thomas and Richard Porter, increasingly committed to pushing the boundaries of enhancement regardless of risk. On the other stood Elizabeth Porter and several members of the advancement program, including Dr. Holloway, who advocated for more careful protocols and a return to the Institute's original focus on treating otherwise terminal conditions. As 1947 progressed, this internal conflict intensified. The government representatives, sensing division within the Institute, began making more aggressive demands for access to their advanced protocols. Military applications became an increasingly central focus of discussions, with proposals for enhancing soldiers' capabilities in ways that troubled even some of the Institute's most committed researchers. The seeds of the Willowbrook Institute's eventual downfall were being sown in this period of expansion and conflict. The delicate balance between scientific ambition and ethical restraint that had allowed their work to progress for nearly 2 decades was beginning to falter. The question was no longer whether their research would face a reckoning, but when and how that confrontation would occur. As research at Willowbrook intensified, so did the ethical dilemmas facing everyone involved. The progress they had made was undeniable. Terminal patients restored to health, crippling conditions reversed, and human capabilities enhanced beyond what mainstream medicine believed possible. Yet the costs of this progress were becoming increasingly difficult to justify, even for those who had devoted their lives to the Institute's mission. What started as a quest to push medicine beyond its conventional boundaries had evolved into something more profound and potentially dangerous, an attempt to redefine the fundamental limits of human nature itself. The choices made at Willowbrook during this period would have consequences far beyond the Institute's walls, affecting how future generations would view the relationship between scientific progress and ethical restraint. The story of scientific ambition is often told as a simple triumph of knowledge over ignorance. But the Porter family's research reveals the complex reality that true breakthroughs rarely follow a straight moral line. If these ethical dilemmas are making you question your assumptions about progress, share this video with someone who appreciates that advancement often comes with difficult choices. Hit that like button to help us continue exploring these hidden chapters of scientific history. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next installment, where we'll reveal how the Institute's work began to attract attention that would ultimately lead to its exposure. The autumn of 1947 brought a seemingly innocuous development to the Willowbrook Institute that would ultimately alter the trajectory of the Porter family's research forever. The arrival of Dr. Eleanor Bennett, a 34-year-old neurologist with impeccable credentials from Stanford Medical School, appeared to be merely another strategic recruitment to strengthen their research team. What none of the Porters realized was that Dr. Bennett's application to join the Institute had been carefully orchestrated for purposes beyond scientific collaboration. Eleanor Bennett had built her reputation studying unusual neurological cases, patients who had recovered from supposedly permanent brain injuries or who demonstrated cognitive abilities that defied conventional explanation. Her published research was rigorous and respected, but it deliberately concealed her deeper interest in cases that suggested deliberate enhancement rather than natural variation or spontaneous recovery. For 3 years, she had been tracking former patients of the Willowbrook Institute, documenting patterns that couldn't be explained by conventional treatment. Her arrival at the Institute was approved by Thomas Porter himself, who saw in her publications a mind that might be receptive to their more advanced work. Dr. Bennett shows the intellectual flexibility we require, he noted in a memo to Richard and Elizabeth. Her research already pushes against conventional limitations, though she's careful to maintain scientific respectability. She could be valuable in helping us bridge the gap between our private work and what we can present to the medical community. Eleanor's introduction to the Institute followed the established protocol for new researchers. She was initially assigned to the public-facing regenerative medicine program, working with patients recovering from severe injuries using treatments that, while innovative, remained within the boundaries of what could be published in medical Journals. Thomas Porter personally mentored her, carefully evaluating her responses to increasingly unorthodox approaches before determining how much of their true work to reveal. What made Dr. Bennett different from previous recruits was her exceptional observational skill combined with an almost flawless ability to project exactly the reaction the Porters wanted to see. When Thomas suggested theoretical treatments that would be considered experimental but not unethical, she responded with thoughtful consideration rather than reflexive rejection. When he hinted at more radical approaches, she expressed intellectual curiosity rather than moral concern. Step by step, she established herself as someone who prioritized scientific advancement over conventional constraints. After 3 months of this careful vetting, Thomas Porter made the decision to introduce Dr. Bennett to limited aspects of their advanced research program. He arranged for her to observe the ongoing treatment of Robert Chambers, a 45-year-old mathematics professor who had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. Chambers was receiving what the Porters called their neural architecture protocol, a treatment that went far beyond managing symptoms to actually restructuring damaged neural pathways and enhancing cognitive function. Eleanor's reaction to this revelation was perfectly calibrated. She expressed initial shock followed quickly by intellectual fascination, asking precise technical questions rather than raising ethical objections. She requested and received permission to review the case documentation, analyzing the before and after cognitive assessments with professional thoroughness. Her final response seemed to confirm everything Thomas had hoped about her compatibility with their work. "This goes beyond anything I imagined was currently possible," she told him after reviewing the data. "The implications for neuroscience are revolutionary. I understand now why this work needs to remain protected from premature exposure." Conventional medicine isn't prepared to integrate advancements of this magnitude. This performance earned her increasing access to the Institute's more classified work. Over the next 2 months, she was gradually introduced to additional aspects of their enhancement protocols, always responding with the perfect balance of scientific enthusiasm and discretion. By early 1948, she had been granted limited access to the advancement program, meeting several of the enhanced individuals and documenting their ongoing development. What none of the Porters suspected was that Dr. Bennett was maintaining a separate set of records, documenting everything she observed. Each evening, she meticulously recorded the day's discoveries in a journal, using a shorthand code she had developed specifically for this purpose. These notes captured not just the scientific procedures, but also conversations, philosophical justifications, and the internal conflict she observed among the research team. Eleanor's true mission at Willowbrook became evident only later when her private journals were discovered alongside the Porters' own records. She had not come to the Institute out of random scientific interest, but as the result of a carefully planned investigation. Her former mentor at Stanford, Dr. Rebecca Winters, had lost her brother to a mysterious neurological condition following treatment at Willowbrook 5 years earlier. Unable to get satisfactory answers about his treatment and disturbed by subtle changes in his behavior before his death, Dr. Winters had begun connecting with other families who had similar experiences with the Institute. This informal investigation had identified a pattern concerning enough to warrant a more systematic approach, but official channels seemed unlikely to produce results given the Porters' reputation and connections. Dr. Bennett, whose research interests made her a plausible recruit for the Institute, had volunteered to attempt to infiltrate the organization from within. Her mission was simply to document what was actually happening at Willowbrook and to determine whether the treatments being administered were as ethical as the Porters claimed publicly. As Eleanor gained deeper access to the Institute's work, she found herself in an increasingly complex moral position. The scientific achievements she witnessed were undeniably revolutionary. Patients who should have died were not only surviving but thriving. Disabilities considered permanent were being reversed, and human capabilities were being enhanced in ways that could transform society. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check.